AITA for taking a paternity test after my newborn's hair color made me suspicious. I'm 26, and my wife, Rachel, is 25. We've only been married for 2 years, so yeah, we still feel like a young couple. We hadn't hit any major roadblocks as a couple until this, and I thought we were doing pretty well. We'd even just had a baby. When I found out we were having a boy, I was over the moon. My own dad was a disaster, a real textbook example of what not to be. So I was stoked to be the best possible dad to this kid. But the second I saw him, a doubt crept in, and it guts me how much that ruined what should have been a perfect day. To get the full picture, you need a little family background. I'm about as pale as a redhead gets, with super bright red hair, like full-on ginger. I get sunburned if it's just overcast. My wife, Rachel, is blonde with blue eyes. Our baby boy was born with jet black hair and brown eyes. The moment I laid eyes on him, I had this weird feeling, but the sheer joy of him being born kind of pushed it down. In the days that followed, though, those questions wouldn't leave me alone. My son looked nothing like me. I get that most newborns look like wrinkled, angry potatoes, but I could at least see his mom in him. He had her dimples, and they seemed to share the same nose. But me? Not a trace. What really threw me was the hair. I'm no biologist, and I know hair color genetics are complicated, but I couldn't see any way my son could have black hair. I even asked a doctor buddy if I was missing something. There are a few other redheads in my immediate family, but most of us have brown hair. The only black hair in my family comes from some in-laws and their kids. And Rachel's family? Almost entirely blonde or dirty blonde. Her dad has brown hair, but he used to joke they all looked like a bunch of Vikings. No matter how much I Googled, I couldn't figure out how it was possible for my son to have black hair. Sure, I knew genetics can be a wild card, and there was a slim chance some gene from a black-haired ancestor just decided to pop up, but I couldn't bank on that. So, I decided to take matters into my own hands and get a paternity test. It felt like a huge betrayal, but I didn't feel like I had a choice. The not knowing was eating me alive, and it was starting to affect Rachel too. She noticed I wasn't happy, and sometimes it even seemed like I was struggling to hold or play with her son. I convinced myself a paternity test was the best thing for everyone. If I was wrong, I'd have peace of mind, and everything could go back to normal. I'd just carry a little guilt for a while, but as long as she never found out, I'd get over it. And if I was right, and the kid wasn't actually mine, well, I'd cross that bridge when I came to it. So, I bought a home paternity test kit. I had to go to a local drugstore to get it. I didn't want to order it online and risk Rachel finding the package. These drugstore tests are pretty cheap and almost 100% accurate. They can even be used in court, but that was getting way ahead of myself. I just needed to know if the kid was actually mine first. It was easy enough to get some alone time with him to do the test. I'd just offer to watch him while Rachel took a much-needed nap. She was more than happy to agree. If you've ever cared for a newborn, you'll know I'm not exaggerating when I say she was out like a light in under 5 minutes. Once she was asleep, I got the kit out and used the swabs to collect the DNA. I packed everything up carefully and put the baby in his carrier. Then I made a quick run to the post office to mail the package. I was worried Rachel would wake up before I got back, and I was ready to say I'd just gone for a walk, but she was still dead to the world. Waiting for the results was agony. I tried really hard not to get too attached to the baby. In my head, I never called him my son, just to soften the blow if the results came back the way I feared. All that time, Rachel was worried about how disconnected I was becoming. She even thought I might be dealing with some postpartum depression myself. I just lied and told her I was exhausted from work and a new baby. She seemed to buy it. I felt bad about lying, but I couldn't tell her the truth yet. Women don't generally take the idea of a paternity test well. It took about a week for the email to arrive. I locked myself in the bathroom to read it, and even then, I hesitated for a good while before I worked up the nerve to open it. Not the biological father. It felt like I'd been sucker punched. For a second, I tried to convince myself it had to be a mistake. Maybe I contaminated the sample. Maybe I did it wrong. I'm not a doctor or anything, right? But I knew I was just making excuses. I was as careful as I could possibly be, and I'm a careful guy. Up until about a year ago, I used to build intricate model airplanes. I know how to follow instructions. It definitely wasn't a mistake on my end. Besides, deep down, I always knew, from the very beginning. The doubt I'd had since the moment I saw him became something solid, something real. It was disgusting, because I wanted to be wrong. I wanted him to be my son. I wanted to raise him. I already loved that little baby. But he wasn't mine, and I couldn't do that to myself. It took me a while to pull myself together. I was sitting in that bathroom for about 30 minutes before Rachel came looking for me. She knocked and asked if I was okay. I told her no. I opened the door and showed her the test results on my phone. All I said was, "He's not mine." She went white as a sheet and just stood there, silent. When she finally composed herself, she surprised me by asking how I could even think about getting a paternity test. She started ranting about trust and everything we'd been through, about her carrying the baby. But I yelled at her. I told her to shut up. She looked at me like I'd slapped her. I'd never spoken to her like that, but I wasn't going to stand there and let her make me feel guilty for being deceived. I told her not to push me. I'd had my suspicions from the moment I saw him, and I decided to find out the truth. Her eyes welled up, like she was about to cry. I thought she was going to admit it, but she just said, "It was probably a mistake." The way she said it, her voice trembling and tears streaming down her face, almost made me believe her. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't let myself be fooled. I told her to stop lying and just tell me the truth for once. She was quiet for a while, then walked into the living room and sank into an armchair. She covered her face, sobbing for a moment, and then choked out, "Don't hate me." My heart dropped. So it was true. Don't hate her. It was already too late for that. All the happiness I'd felt after the birth was gone, all because of her. She sobbed for another minute before continuing. She claimed it was a one-time thing, a single mistake that never happened again. She said she got wasted at a friend's bachelorette party and didn't even realize she'd slept with another man until later. She claimed she didn't even know his name. I didn't know whether to believe her or not. One time that resulted in a pregnancy, and she didn't even know who the biological father was? That sounded way too convenient. But I also realized it didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. She tried to pass off another man's child as mine. I didn't even care who he was. That was her problem. My problem was getting Rachel out of my life. Rachel was still sobbing loudly, and it was getting on my nerves. Why was she crying like she was the one suffering here? At least she still had a son. I felt like I'd lost a son I never truly had. I loved him so much, and now I had to get used to the idea that I wouldn't be raising him. He wasn't my child. I wasn't going to spend my life taking care of someone else's kid. I asked Rachel if she realized what she'd done to me. I told her she hadn't just cheated on me. She had shattered my heart. I asked her how she could do this to me. How could she consciously try to pass off another man's child as mine? She stopped crying long enough to give a coherent answer. She said she regretted her mistake and was terrified when she found out she was pregnant. But she also said she'd hoped it was mine because, according to her, the timing lined up. She claimed she'd cried and prayed every day that the child would be mine. She kept talking about prayers and hopes and dreams, and I just tuned her out. What was the point? Nothing she said was going to change reality. I just asked her if she had ever planned to tell me the truth. She hesitated for a moment and looked away. Of course, she wasn't going to tell me. If the kid had looked anything like me, or if I had ignored my gut feeling, I would never have found out. If I had been a little more trusting, she would have kept up the charade, and I would have lived a lie. I would have raised that kid thinking he was mine, and she would have been by my side the whole time knowing the truth, that the kid was supposedly the son of some random guy she didn't even know. That was insane. I told her I needed space. I packed a duffel bag and was out of the apartment in less than an hour. I told my brother everything, and he let me crash at his place. I didn't just leave to get away from Rachel. As harsh as it sounds, I also needed to get away from the baby. Every time I thought about how he would smile at me or fall asleep in my arms, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. Despite all my efforts, I had already gotten attached to him. It was only natural. Now I was going to lose him, and the pain was unbearable. It was all Rachel's fault. For the next few days, I stayed with my brother. I avoided any contact with Rachel, even though she was constantly calling and texting. I didn't want to hear her voice. I didn't want to hear the baby's cries in the background either. I needed to isolate myself from them so I could start to heal from what she'd done. That was the only way I'd be able to move on and do what needed to be done. It hasn't been easy being away from him. It hurts. Although reminding myself that I'm not his father helps a little. I'm giving myself one more week to pull myself together, and then I'll start the divorce proceedings. Update. It's been a while since my last update, and I figured it was important to let you all know how things turned out. There was a lot of interest in my original post. The first thing I should say is that it didn't actually get easier. Someone suggested I should stop thinking of him as my baby and start seeing him as her baby. It was really hard at first, but I have to admit that, in the long run, it helped. It allowed me to think more objectively about the situation. Rachel, however, wasn't making things easy. She kept trying to contact me through calls and texts. Her messages were desperate. She was begging me to come home and help her raise her baby. She said that she didn't care what the DNA test said. To her, I was the father. I was the man who had cared for him and helped raise him. I was the one who chose his name. That, according to her, made me his father, regardless of what science said. That was infuriating, honestly. She was trying to lecture me about responsibility after knowingly committing paternity fraud. I saw her act for what it was. She didn't want to end up a single mother. She genuinely had no idea who the father was, or maybe she did, and he was some deadbeat who couldn't contribute anything meaningful. Either way, she was out of luck because I wasn't going to play the role of stand-in dad. I filed for divorce 2 weeks after I moved out. I would have done it sooner, but I was so messed up by what she'd done that I needed time to calm down and think clearly. In the meantime, I already had a lawyer lined up to help me through the whole process. One of my main concerns was child support. I know that child support laws can be crazy, and I was afraid she'd try to force me to pay for a child that wasn't mine. My lawyer told me it was possible, but only if I had legally acted as the child's father. I had taken care of him, but one thing I hadn't done was sign the birth certificate. When I started having doubts about whether the child was mine, I decided against signing it right away. I made excuses and never got around to it, and eventually, Rachel stopped asking. So I wasn't the child's father, legally or biologically. Still, my lawyer warned me that I wasn't completely in the clear. He reminded me that, ultimately, it was the court's decision, but that he would do his best to make them see reason. Rachel went from texting and calling to showing up in person. She found out I was staying with my brother and showed up at his door multiple times. We never let her in. We didn't even talk to her. She would always leave eventually, but the last time she sat on his porch for 3 hours with the baby in her arms. Maybe she thought she would win me over by showing me the baby. She only left when my brother finally called the cops to have her removed. She didn't show up at his house again after that. When the divorce proceedings began, she said she wanted mediation. She believed we could resolve things amicably and decide what was best for the baby. I reminded her that the baby wasn't mine. She wanted child support, and I'd rather pee on an electric fence than pay her a dime. So mediation was out. That didn't stop her from trying to get child support, but by then, we already had a court-ordered paternity test. The results were the same as before, which, surprisingly, still stung. But, with a negative paternity test and no signed birth certificate, I had no financial obligation to her baby. The rest of the divorce went by pretty quickly. The child was the only real point of conflict. We didn't have much property to fight over, no pets, and we were renting our apartment, which she kept. I didn't mind her keeping it. I was already planning to move out of state. I needed a change of scenery, and I felt like there was nothing left for me here anymore. It was just going to hurt if I stayed, even though I loved the city. This woman was the reason my entire life had taken a nosedive. Plus, the apartment was too big for one person and a baby. We moved there when she got pregnant because we wanted space for kids. Now she'd be living there alone, with a child. I knew she wouldn't be able to afford the rent on that place by herself. She'd definitely have to downsize. Now that she had to support a child on her own. Well, maybe she would finally track down the child's father, and they could figure out the finances. I was glad I had won the child support battle, but there was still the issue of alimony, or spousal support as they call it here. Just like with child support, I fought tooth and nail to avoid giving her a single penny. The idea of sending money to this woman, after what she did to me, made my blood boil. Unfortunately, the judge decided I would have to pay her alimony until she went back to work. But the upside was the amount. I'm pretty sure it was the paternity fraud that made the judge award her such a pathetic sum. I almost laughed out loud when I heard how much I had to pay. The real show was Rachel's face. She looked absolutely miserable. Nothing was going her way, and I loved it. The whole situation was horrible, but she was the one who dragged us all into this mess. It was good to see her upset for once. Rachel was bitter about the alimony. It turned out she was going around telling anyone who would listen that I had abandoned her and the baby. I found out when I got a very angry call from her mother. She asked me what kind of man I was to abandon a mother and her newborn child. So I didn't cover for Rachel. I told her mother the truth. Her grandson wasn't my son. He had another father, and Rachel had no idea who he was, because apparently, that was the kind of reckless life her daughter led. Rachel's mother was horrified. It was harsh, probably more than I needed to say, but it got the point across. She ended the call right away, and I'd bet good money she was about to give Rachel an earful. I don't have any contact with her anymore, but my brother keeps me in the loop. He said that she's struggling hard to adjust to being a single mom. She's always hitting up her friends, either for money or to see if they can babysit. She's not adapting well to her new reality at all. I try not to think about her baby. There are still nights when I lie awake thinking about how things could have been if Rachel hadn't made her mistake and hadn't ruined all three of our lives. But most nights, I sleep pretty well knowing that I dodged a massive bullet. I had a hunch, I acted on it, and I took control of my life before I ended up trapped raising another man's kid. And now Rachel is a single mother who is about to find out just how hard life can be when you take a good thing for granted. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.